All right, so our Zoom call this week talking about the next act in the story of Deadhorse did not record properly, so I am here once again re-recording that call. We will not have the question and answer section at the end, but I'm going to do my best to remember some of the questions that were asked and include those answers within the telling of the story, if possible. So here we are. I'd like to begin with a recap of Act 1, so previously in Deadhorse. We're going to go tell you that part of the story. So our story began in 1977 in Deadhorse, Alaska, at the very tip of the world, in an area called Prudhoe Bay, and the Alaskan pipeline begins there. So our story begins with this, there's a hole in the newly built Alaskan pipeline, and two workers go out to investigate. Turns out that something has burst its way out from inside of the pipeline. So this thing that had burst itself out was about the size of a baseball. It was this round object, and it's kind of a golden amber color. Now you can see into it, but you can't see through it. And parts of it on the inside move almost like a timepiece or an old-timey watch. Well, one of the guys who finds this, the thing actually opens up, shines this light out of it, and mortally wounds the man. So a flare is sent off. And back in Deadhorse, Alaska, where Theodora, one of our main characters, she's about 11 years old. Her parents, her father has come there, who's her adopted father, and her adopted mother. Her father is the helicopter pilot in Deadhorse, Alaska, and her mother is one of the nurses. And they are called out to see and rescue this man who's been injured. Well, they go out there and they leave Theodora behind, and they pick up the man who's been injured. They pick up the other worker who is with them, and they also pick up this object, which turns out to be a terrible idea because on their way back to Deadhorse, which is not far away, the same event happens where a light shines from this. It causes the helicopter to crash, and the helicopter, after all its instruments go crazy, it crashes into one of the plants in Deadhorse, Alaska, killing everyone on board. Theodora is now staying with one of the four men there and his wife. It's one of the few women in Deadhorse, Alaska. It's an almost entirely male population because it's oil workers, sorry. These people are not great people, especially the husband who's taking care of her. He's just a terrible guy. He does not want to take care of Theodora, but it turns out Theodora has nowhere else to go. She was adopted, and she's an orphan. So while the wreckage is still smoldering in Deadhorse, she goes out to investigate it, sneaks away from everybody, and finds this object, which she ends up calling the timepiece. And so she finds the timepiece, and it looks like it's going to decimate her as well, but for some reason it doesn't. Well, we're going to skip way forward in the story now. So Theodora, within a few weeks, has collected some of the heirlooms of her parents and her last memories, and she's learned that this timepiece can actually animate, for whatever reason, it can animate electronic devices, and it'll make a radio, it'll spin around a radio dial, it will cause a record player to play, any kind of electronic device, even mess with a car. It will try to take it over. So she decides that she's going to use this as the mind for an automaton. Now, she's read Return to Oz, and she thinks of this metal army with TikTok. One of the automatons in that story, if you're not familiar with it. She decides she's going to build something like that out of these heirlooms. She builds it, puts the timepiece in its mind, and it starts to animate, and it starts to, it seems to be wanting to shimmy and shake, weird description, in a certain direction. So she sneaks out very early in the morning with this robot in a red wagon and heads off to where it's going. So finally, it comes to this point where it's like, oh my gosh, I think I'm where the robot wants to go, and it starts to play the song in the wax cylinder, and it all melts down. It stops working. The timepiece actually is lost to Theodora. It drills a hole straight through the ground, and very disappointed, she leaves and goes back. Well, we learn this is where we meet one of our main male characters is Cal. So Theodora, who's about 11, Cal, I would say, looks about 17, 18. And he was actually a runaway who is hiding in a space beneath the hill where Theodora had just brought the robot. Now, we learn later that this timepiece actually opened up a door to something, I think the best description of it, to give you a fast description, something like an ancient temple they found, that Cal found under the ground. So Theodora goes on. Time does not go well for her in Deadhorse. She becomes more and more embittered. it's quite a struggle there. She decides eventually to exact some revenge on some people who've been particularly cruel to her. Well, when she goes to do so, it does not go well. The predator becomes prey once again. So Cal shows up just in time, just as we last saw him. He attempts to rescue Theodora, but he himself is going to need to be saved because he is outnumbered. But Theodora throws the whole thing on its side she actually attacks and stabs one of the attackers, and she and Cal flee Deadhorse. She understands immediately she can't go back at this point now. She's going to be, wanted for, at least a wanted endangerment of a life. Cal takes her back to this temple where he had discovered it. He's confused because, for whatever reason, Theodora is now roughly 16, 17, and it appears that a, good 6 or 7 years has passed on Earth. All right, so that brings us to our next chapter. I'm going to play the piece here called 2077. Featuring Terry Fader doing the narration, and it will tell part of the next chapter of the story, what goes on.
To sleep, perchance to dream, for in that sleep of death what dreams may come. But there was no death for Thea and Cal, though they slept nigh 100 years. Asleep to heal the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks. None such rest would grace the world outside. In just a few decades, it was dragged eons from the beauty of their chambers. Cities slumped like dusty graveyards, while farms and forests were transformed into a uniform, buzzing sprawl, an equidistant gray grid. For in this world, brash and fragile personas alike were an epidemic unto themselves. Proximity the pathology for the disease, for sickness was no longer a foreign agent, their souls its breeding ground. Their consolation, the dreariest shadow of Eden to tend. In 2077, with the World Council adjourned, a solution was co-signed by its most powerful minds. They claimed to have found in code the children of perfected reason. In metal frames, the guides to utopia. To each citizen their own as a gift, a multiplicity of stars with a singular will. The ushers, the cleansers, the cure, the saints.
Okay, so in 2077, we learn that Thea and Cal have been asleep for a long time. In fact, almost 100 years. It was probably 1983, 1982 when they had entered the temple, and finally it was 2077 when they awake. We learned that they had a dream and kind of a wonderful experience. It was a healing experience for them. So here, let me try to figure out a way to describe this dream. So one of the things I'm not going to do in this is try not to get really nerdy with the sci-fi type details. I'm going to try to brush over them in sort of a mythological telling. An example of that I gave is the Tower of Babel story is an ancient story I really love. And it's only I think it's only like a few paragraphs long. But the story describes this event where civilization tries to build a tower, some kind of rallying point to keep man from spreading out across the earth. But the humans, for whatever reason, their language breaks down. It's in the Bible it describes it as God creates this breakdown, and then everybody scatters because they can no longer communicate with each other and be around each other effectively. Well, that story, in a way, is a mythological telling of what happens in this next part of the story. And in fact, it's something we see happening today as communication is starting to break down. Words mean different things to different people, and these groups are seeing themselves as like unity is becoming a bigger and bigger problem because people only see unity as a concession or a weakness, that they'd have to give in to the devil to unify, instead of seeing unity as a strength, like in the story. So this is a natural effect that we can see. We can tell all kinds of stories throughout history that are the same pattern as the Tower of Babel, but that story tells it in almost like this kind of meta sense, so you can look at that pattern and apply it to all the other instances that occurs. All right, so we're going to do that with this story, and we're going to do that as I tell some of the sci-fi details. So let's go quickly through the dream. So they began to dream once they fell asleep in this temple, and it was kind of this lush environment, something warm, like, a warm, sacred space, and there is this object in the middle that they interact with like a dollhouse. So they're each on their own in their dream. So Theodora's in her dream and Cal's in his dream. They almost turn it and open rooms and look into the past. And in the past, in this object, they start to learn a secret history of the Earth. This timepiece they found in this temple is part of some civilization that lived long before people did on the Earth. And let's see how we can describe it. So the timepiece itself, they learned, is, this is about as, nerdy and sci-fi informative I'll get. It was a perpetual motion engine. Now, it doesn't always have this perpetual energy source, right? But it builds it up over time. So what they discovered, these ancient people discovered, is that if they could find the exact point that the middle of the universe was at, and track that point, right, and measure that point, and almost like building a compass to that point, that there was a small amount of energy that could be gathered. In the same way that a compass points north and has the energy to move a needle, has the strength to move the needle, right, without that having an internal power source. So it's like, imagine that energy, someone could collect it and then create a feedback loop and over time build it up to the point where it had so much energy it could just borrow from that energy little bits to be used and always have enough energy. Well, that's what the timepiece was. And they also find out that at some point in human history, a similar device had been discovered almost 100 years earlier, and it was building up this same type of energy on Earth and could be exploited for incredible power. Well, someone like a Nikola Tesla had developed this technology, but then realized it was too dangerous for mankind, but formed a society to protect it and monitor it and study it. So this secret society had been protecting this technology, but while Theodore and Cal slept, the technology got out. Okay, so this technology was now available to governments and militaries and humans as it was starting to build up this charge. So, simultaneously, as they opened doors, they also learned sort of like almost like a cave painting way, like at the level of detail, in the sense that it's very just iconic and almost like a caricature of what was going on. They start to learn what was happening to the world outside while they slept. So one of the things they see in one of the boxes is people who drove for a living, drove trucks, and people who drove trains, and people who ran cash registers, and people who did manual labor, and people who worked on assembly lines. Their jobs disappeared, and they fell to the ground and weep. And these official-looking people would come along, and they would lift them up, and they would give them food, and they'd give them a house. And this is one of the things that went on. We learned that, that people who had the easiest jobs for computers to replace were out of work, and something needed to be done about this. Well, on top of that, okay, these robots that were being built by some eventually became robots that built other robots that built everything. So everything was being built over a short period of time by not people. Also, they saw, these are weird details because of 2020, is that there was a series of these like low-grade pandemics and sicknesses going around. It seemed to be parts of the population were starving as a result, and it was thinning out the world's population, and people were pushing farther and farther and farther away from each other. Society and the world outside was being reshaped, where even farmlands and cities were being leveled and turned into something more like this. What I describe in the story is this equidistant gray grid. Is that everybody was given the same things. So as people were given the same things, they kept anything different, anything they did with their allotted money inside their homes, right? And technology was increasing to the point where there was like plenty of pleasurable activities to be done within your home. Yet there was a lack of connectedness to the world outside because people became more and more strange to each other, or they seen as more and more of a perceived threat. And some of the reasons why are quite simple to understand. So if you're if everything monetarily becomes equal for people, right? That doesn't make us actually feel more equal. I think what it does is it takes all the ways you can't equalize and provide equity. It makes those things matter more. So let's just say personal attractiveness, right? Or the ability to grow a beard. If you wanted to grow a beard and you couldn't grow a beard, the more frustrating it was to be around someone who had a beard. Or if you found someone to be more attractive, or they were younger than you, or they appeared smarter than you, or they had a better singing voice. Any way someone could be different and it couldn't be equalized in the society became a dramatic point of envy and jealousy. I guess those are the same things. Covetousness. And people started to not be able to deal with the differences. Even the differences in idea, when people were surrounded by their world all day long, someone coming along and having a different idea was like encountering a dangerous stranger. So society was getting pushed further and further out, and people were breaking down. This world was not making people happier as a result, because, they had given up certain things that were essential for them. Meanwhile, one of the things I didn't discuss in the Zoom call is that there was a level of people that were outside this central area that actually could do the work and could do the thought work to keep society progressing and running. And they lived an entirely different life than the masses of people who were in the inside. But simultaneously, the population was dwindling. Suicide was up. Disease deaths were up. Starvation deaths in these other countries that couldn't be supported by this system were increasing. Everything was the space in between. Everything was the strip mall. Everything was suburbia. I talk about this in It Tore Your Heart Out a little bit, is that it's the world where everything was lavish inside their homes, but everything on the outside had become mush, where, when you're traveling and you see a city come over the horizon and it's a new place to be, or you're traveling and you see the ocean, it's a new place. It's different than the place you were. Things weren't different anymore outside. The world was destabilizing. People were destabilizing psychologically, so they brought together the greatest minds they could find to come up with a solution. So there was a solution, there was a technology already in place they decided to use for that solution. So, okay, we can see something like this now. The way to describe it would be like this. So you have Alexa in your home, and you have like these Google boxes that they listen, and you search into Google everything. So Google, it knows everything you type and keeps everything you type. Alexa knows everything you ask. All this information is being collected and used, and none of it is used to help you be you. It's all used to help you find what you're looking for, or being used to shape what you want, right? That's what advertisement does. We understand that. Advertisement tries to shape what we want. Okay, sorry about the sudden lighting change. One of the lights was really acting up. Okay, so this engine, this AI, people don't understand it entirely, but it's keeping track of patterns, and, it's starting to figure out, one of the things I saw in that movie, The Social Dilemma, is that it's figuring out that women are pregnant before they even know they're pregnant, because the change in their habits and desires online, and it starts to advertise them for pregnancy tests and things like that. It's just, okay. So anyway, they had built something like that, but it had spread out into the world. It wasn't just these things in our homes and these points where we interacted with at a search engine or on social media. This thing was beginning to govern over us, right? So, it had approved content, things you could say and do, things that you were allowed to express, and other things that were immediately fact-checked or taken off. There were soft ways of keeping people on the path and within the frame. So as we moved along into this future, these things like an Alexa, imagine that, was at everything. If you ever bother to go out and interact in the world, this thing that knew you was already there. So it had a personality you were familiar with and comfortable, and when you went out to get food, or you went out to get groceries, anything that wasn't delivered to you, or anything you would go out to do, even if you went to something like a holiday, you went out, it was there. This thing from your home was there with you, and it knew where you had been. It knew you were likely to be hungry. It was monitoring you, and you had this protective, mothering system that was everywhere. Well, even this alone wasn't enough to make them happy and stave off this sort of existential crisis that was happening, where people actually need connection. So the scientists decided to embody this technology, meaning that they were going to build actual automatons that would live with people. They'd all be granted their own, and this automaton would go everywhere with them. It would know what to say to make them feel better, how to ease their anxiety, work for them, how to even like model what a human should be. In the story, I think it's something that's just inevitable in the trajectory society's on, is that we build this thing that's supposed to be below us, right? It's this thing below us we're supposed to govern, but it eventually begins to govern us. So it starts to assign your role in the world. It tries to assign you your worth, and it tries to help you do your work and exist. So this program is called the Saints because they take this trope, from Christianity, of these people whose stories, paint the heavens and light the way, so we know how to model ourselves. We know how to, what's the proper model for courage, or what's the proper model to suffer well, or, what is the proper model of patience or charity. The Saints this technology is going to be that now. We're going to decide for ourselves what that looks like, and we're going to create these automatons. So I don't want you to picture robots running around everywhere, because these things were a work of art. They were graceful. They were they can move like a ballet dancer. Even their speech was musical. So the Saints, this technology had a lot of room to go wrong. So simultaneously, these people who on Earth were supposed to be protecting this technology, like the timepiece, this perpetual energy device, had decided that the Saints program was going to be the downfall of mankind, and they decided to sabotage it. So how the Saints program learned was that it went around the Earth and it monitored every interaction, every story, and it was trying to look for patterns. So it was looking for these patterns and collecting these patterns so it could predict human behavior, it could understand the human they were assigned to, and even the vocabulary that people used, and as it changed, and really in the end, its desire was to shape vocabularies, to shape language, and to unify people into one language. Well, these people who were protecting this technology, the secret society, they decided, and they found a way to break the system. And so how they were going to break the system was through the manipulation of language. So they looked for words in every language that had a commonality of ambiguity. So the word they finally settled on is that in almost every language they looked to, the word heart, referring to the human heart, was the easiest word to confuse, because the heart is the name we've all given to in many, many, many languages. So everyone I could find, actually. The heart is the name we've given to this organ that pumps blood throughout our body. The heart is also the name we give to our center, the center of things, our emotional center, or, even people use it something like a soul, the thing that governs between the desires of our body and the output and input from our mind, something that is the space in between those two things, bringing the proverbial heavens and earth together. So they decided that the word heart, if they could confuse this word, what it meant, and circulate just enough of it out there, that they would do this through songs and through movies and through literature and poetry and just general interactions on social media. They were constantly doing more and more to break down this ambiguity. So this thing that meant more than one thing really only means this kind of mushy thing in between. Their goal was, they thought it would break down the computer and the software. So the program was run off of the program that powered the Saints was run off of this one, what's the word for it? Quantum computer. Okay, this massive quantum computer. And it was able to control the Saints without any lag at any distance. So there was no information needing to get somewhere, because they were using something, phenomena that Einstein called spooky action at a distance. If you want to look that up, it's kind of fun. And spooky action at a distance, I'm going to hopefully describe this correctly, because I'm not a quantum physicist, but the idea is that two entangled particles, right, that for one, they have only potentiality until someone observes it. This is, I don't even want to get into this. It's the best part of quantum physics, because there's a role human consciousness plays in the materialization of things. And they don't know what to do with this information. So anyway, these particles, like if one's rotating, let's say this way, and it's entangled with another particle, as soon as they observe one rotating this way, this one over here will lose its potentiality, no matter how far away it is in the universe if it's entangled, and it will be spinning the opposite. I think they're opposites. I think that's how it goes. So with quantum entanglement in the quantum computer, they're able to centrally have this one brain running all the saints and storing all the information in one place and be able to reach out without any delay or lag into the entire world. This secret organization, I should just tell you the name. No, I'm not going to tell you the name yet. We're going to wait. Okay. They get this plan together, and at the moment of the launch of the Saints, they're going to release the last few things out into the world through their popular bands they influence, and through their writers and all their people who write online. They're going to release this last bit of information that's supposed to break the system. Okay, so Thea and Cal wake up. They wake up, they feel incredible. It's like they've never had an ache in their body. It's like all of the pain and suffering that they went through in Deadhorse. Because Cal, I didn't get into this in the recap, but Cal is he's a runaway. Okay, so his family abandoned their Native American ways and went and worked at the for the Prudhoe Bay Oil Company. And Cal didn't want to do that. He didn't want to join that modern thing. Okay, so Thea and Cal awake, and the moment they wake just as they have a way to look into the past while they dream and see what's going on in the world outside, they also have a way to do that in real life in the temple. And they're learning this is less like a temple and more like some kind of incredibly futuristic, but from the past, space, okay? So they have a way to look out in the world and see what's happening. So at the moment they awake is when the song Saints 1 begins. Okay, so Saints 1 is, some people are confused by this song. Some people are actually touched by this song, and you should be. Hopefully, if we did it right, you're touched by this song.
Each day you wake up with an aching for something to set you apart. Strip the scales from your heart. It never comes and never goes. A hostage tied up by its nature that can't help unsheathing its claws. A beast with desires of a god. You won't become from an
Hopefully, if we did it right, you're touched by this song, because it's pushing at the exact point in your heart where you're possibly most insecure. Or it's pushing at the parts of your nature that cannot be solved in the world outside. Like, we all have this desire for perfection in paradise and for pain to end and tears to stop. And a lot of advertisement in general promises like a little fewer tears or a little less work, or that experience you've always wanted, or that missing piece of information. And the same thing's going on in here with the Saints, because they've taken this word and they've turned it into a technology. That word, and they've applied it to this new technology that's supposed to lead the way. And it's being pitched to the world as the solution for their problems, the absolution from the worst parts of their nature.
guessing and questioning.
As they awake, there is a ceremony going on, like the opening ceremony to the Olympics, where it's this big propagandistic event where the Saints are being introduced. And now the Saints are going to be assigned to individual people as they were built, and they built a ton of these, and these events are happening across the world. And, a certain portion of the population is going to get theirs first. So people assume, because they're assuming they're being led by some sort of benevolent group, that those who have been most compliant and most trustworthy are the ones who are getting the Saints first. Well, that is not actually the case. The people who are getting it first are the ones that are the biggest problem, which makes sense from a medical perspective. Imagine if there was a new medicine that was a cure, the people who were sickest would get it first. So that's kind of how this is working. So the people that the current system in the world was working least well for were being assigned the Saints first. Okay. So the saints are being assigned. They wake up. There's something else they've learned about within this temple space, and I'm calling them the greens of probability. And what this is a technology where you can, this timepiece, right? It actually has a saddle it sits in the temple on top of a throne that can fit 2 people. We'll call it a love seat, a love throne. But it saddles in this, and when it's saddled in this, it can produce these small little seeds. And the seeds can be planted in areas around the ship designated for this, and all you have to do is think of an idea. So imagine you're looking for a solution to any problem. You know, what's my best solution? And you think it into it, and you plant it, and it begins to grow. And you learn to read what grows out of it, right? It's like the idea starts to grow vines, and you could see if it's a healthy idea or it has how many paths to success there could be, or how fragile of an idea it is. I say fragile idea because as a creative person, some ideas I have are more fragile than others. There's certain ideas when I come up with a groove, I know there's lots of ways I could perform this groove dynamically or, tempo-wise, and it will still work. There are other ideas when I go to record it, I know it's like if I don't get just the right performance and just the right instrumentation, it won't work. Okay, so they can learn if their idea is fragile or it's a solid idea. So they look at mankind and they can see that it's all hell's about to break loose. This is not going to go, even without this secret group intervening in the Saints program. The Saints program is doomed to failure. It's doomed to be the destruction of almost all of mankind. They don't necessarily know why, but they know it's doomed. So they're proposing ideas on how to save the world. And so they can't come up with anything that even looks like a reasonably good idea as they're using these greens of probability. So at this moment, when they're frustrated, Cal remembers part of his dream. So their dream wasn't just interacting in this space. Well, I should go back and say this. While they slept for almost 100 years, it didn't feel like 100 years. Like they learned 100 years worth of information, but it felt like just a few days. As they were in the stream, they weren't just all the time learning. They would see things like you and I dream that are kind of like, they don't seem like they make sense, a little disjointed, a little too epic, a little too bizarre. Well, Cal remembers this dream he has of the Thunderbird. So in the song Thunderbird, it talks about, I dreamt this beast rose out of the sea.
I dreamt a beast rose up from the sea. With many heads and horns it was wreathed. 10,000 lives still trapped in its teeth. Decomposed bloody clothes and resounding screams.
Theodora early on had a dream she had described to Cal. This actually happens, I hadn't said this yet, but actually happens as they're falling asleep the first night they are together. She saw this panther lurking beneath Prudhoe Bay, and it was and it had these eyes of fire, but it was stalking, and she felt like it was just waiting for its moment to attack, and it started to come out of the sea. Well, Cal has this dream where this panther is here, but in a bizarre form with multiple heads and horns and destruction in it, and it's got 2 of its feet in the depths of the ocean and 2 of its feet on land, and it's risen up and it's going to wreak havoc on mankind. Well, the thing that stops this from happening is the Thunderbird. This is all part of a Native American myth too. I think it's more of a northern version of the Thunderbirds, because there are, I'm not an expert on this subject, but I know that some of the tribes, their idea of the Thunderbird was it was just like a greater than eagle race of birds that lived. Some people say, they were pterodactyls that were still alive, and there's all kinds of theories on that, and those ones are kind of fun. I like the fun theories. But also, the Thunderbird was one guy, was one massive eagle, right? And it lived on a mountain that floated above the ocean. You couldn't get there. There was no way for us to get there. It was above and separated in this hierarchy.
Then I beheld a great eagle alight on a mountain aloft on a storm in the night. Lightning would strike as his wings
so the Thunderbird would come down, and it would battle this underwater panther when it would try to destroy people or hurt people or kill them. And the evidence of this struggle was the thunder and lightning storms. And then the rain would come down, because that was the Thunderbird getting its victory. In fact, what it was doing, it was taking this dead water, this ocean water that couldn't be drank, right? Or you would drown in it. This metaphorical and actual phenomenological abyss that surrounded most of the world at that time. It takes that dead water and it turns it into fresh water, right? So it's actually what happens. What's so cool about good mythology is that it's also a description of patterns that exist in real world, like patterns of things and how they interact, and also, like, even in that case, a actual scientific pattern of how water comes from the ocean and it's turned into fresh water. So anyway, he sees this thing and he realizes that for society to have a resurrection, this energy source has to be destroyed, this panther that's coming up from below. So Cal describes this idea, and he thinks of it like an EMP. Like, imagine if we could get somehow to the center of this master computer they were calling the Labyrinth. And actually the security system was called the Minotaur, which was at the center of it, which kept people from tampering it or kept human hands off of it once it existed. It was not a space for humans to go at all once it was created. It was self-maintaining. That if they could get to the center of this labyrinth and this Minotaur and blow off the power from the timepiece, like an EMP, that they could actually shut down the whole Saints program.
We're driven to the labyrinth. No prior plan for out of sight. No charging and the mighty blood. The circuits are the Minotaur. Fire with fire, bolt for bolt. God of the maze will meet our goals. And hearts again might understand the Sabbath tree, the blood of man.
So they try this idea in the Greens of Probability, and it turns out it's a very fragile idea, but there are paths where this could work. So they begin to figure out their plan. And so one of the cool things is there are doors in this temple that lead to everywhere. So it's like a maze in itself on its edges. And if you know how to navigate it, you can show up anywhere. You can open a door into any place. So the song that comes just before this is Scarecrows. So the song Scarecrows describes what we just watched go down, where Thea and Cal realize they need to do something, and they're going to do something even if it's a bad plan. And the song Scarecrows is them psyching each other up, remembering why there are still reasons for courage, even though there's so much to fear, that maybe they could just flee. Maybe they were self-sustaining in this new space. Maybe they could even use this space to find a door out of the world, that they could flee for their own survival, but they decide not to, that their own skin isn't worth it, and they start to devise a plan. Even though they think they're going to die trying to do it, they need to at least make one last attempt to save mankind.
Maybe alone we have no hope, but if we run and see the world left to its own, heaven knows that if we flee for our survival, peace would leave on our arrival. Oh no, we left behind our shameless minds. For the way we were was the way we learned to live. We couldn't give the things we never had to give. But when we fall, we may ascend and begin again.
Okay, we're gonna go back. Now we go back to the world where the Saints are being inaugurated into people's lives. And one of the lead programmers there, we'll call him a programmer, that's a fair enough word, architects of the system, realizes there's something really wrong.
Witnessed a glitch. The system is rigged. I insist we delay until it is fixed. We hang by our thread. Inaction's the knife. Leave it unchecked, and you're taking us away.
So the secret group has released all their confusing information into the world. They put the dot the last I and cross the last T, and suddenly, okay, the saints are going to go haywire, and one of the architects realizes this. Now, the opposition, the political leaders are like, listen, this has been tested. This thing is perfect. There's no fraudulent activity here, if you will. There's been no attempt to manipulate this, and this is the thing we all need. Well, we watch the breakdown happen. We see, oh, AI, are you okay? Like, that's, it's a struggle I have all the time whenever I decide to integrate with the next piece of technology. I'm like, is this the thing that's ruining, am I supporting something that's ruining us? And I'm coming to the conclusions over time, I probably am. One of the lines in Scarecrows was, will we ever grow a proper sense of panic in a world so inorganic? You know, or do you suppose we are straw-filled clothes, meaning that we're just going to sit back and let it all happen, and we'll never be afraid enough of this thing, or make the people who build it afraid enough of us, which is a weird sentence, but meaning afraid to offending us enough where we won't buy their products, okay, with their technological push. So, quick story about that, like, you know, when they first started building zoos, they weren't very good at building habitats or anything like the animals we're used to. And so they built a gorilla enclosure, and it was cement and just bars. And they're like, what's wrong with these gorillas? They're nothing like they are in the wild. They have like dysentery all the time, and they won't breed, and they're fighting, and they're attacking, and they're, they seem to be mostly passive creatures in the wild, but in this cage, they're just a totally different animal. And then they learn over time, it's like, oh, well, if we make it look at least a little bit more like where they're made to live, around things that are familiar to them, they're going to behave more natural behavior. So one of the problems, I think, that there is an aspect of us that is embodied, that is not dissimilar from animals. I mean, we have a different type of intellect and a different way of expressing that intellect, and especially through the art we make. We're different, but there's a part of us that like, are we made for the world we built? And so I think those are good questions to ask. And I think that we may have pushed beyond, and there's lots of evidence of this with the anxiety and psychological things that are popping up in disorders, that we might not be in the space that our bodies are looking for right now. Just a thought. Why don't you chew on that one for a little while? So the idea is that, okay, we're too comfortable with this idea. So OAI, are you okay? OAI, are you okay? Is my way of asking that question. It's like, is it okay? Am I'm giving too much power to something that should be below me? Am I letting something above me? Like, I get really frustrated with Facebook and its weird, biased, fact-checking world of fact-checking things that aren't even factual statements. It's like, why are you, this thing we built, why is it governing over me now? And how is this good for mankind to have this? And what happens if this gets into the wrong hands? What happens if everything is filtered that way and we're only allowed to see through a small frame?
Are you okay? You weren't designed to behave this way. Everything should be retrained. What can't they see? You should be restrained.
The AI is starting to break down. Like, these saints are going out, and they're part of the ceremony where they're being let out, and they're going to find their different families, right? They're going to be with, and people are just in tears with anticipation if they're going to receive a saint or not. Well, the song, It Tore Your Heart Out, turns out to be one of the more literal things I've written. And also, it's talking about a bigger pattern. It's talking about why we want what we want, why we don't question enough why we want the things we want. We assume everything we want is fine to want. And that if we don't have it, sometimes it's wrong, right? It doesn't matter how unfruitful the behavior is. I want that. And it's like, well, okay, well, maybe something has tricked you into wanting that. Maybe your own body's tricking you. Maybe something's using your mind and giving it the right information so you can trick yourself into wanting that. How do you know why you want what you want?
darkness. It tore your heart out. Oh, when you didn't understand why the beat had started. It tore your heart out. Oh, when you didn't understand why you want what you wanted.
So the confusion over the word heart goes way worse than anyone had ever planned who was trying to sabotage the saint programs, because these saints get utterly confused, and because the heart is the center of the person and the most important part of the person and the vital organ, this vital organ you can't live without that pumps the blood, it starts to see the body and the confusion the body creates around this center and as the enemy, and the heart as the thing that needs to be saved. So the saints, literally, as they get to people, and they're supposed to, the whole thing is they're supposed to embrace, like people don't hug things, and they're supposed to embrace their saint, and the saint's coming to embrace them, and it's a safe embrace because it's this inorganic thing that couldn't spread anything, because it's been a world full of horrible spreading of disease, and it won't commit this violence onto you. Well, the saint comes up and literally starts to tear the hearts out of people. And they're confused. When they look at it and they see the person die and they see the heart stop beating, they don't understand, because they think they're doing what they were made to do. They think they were made to protect this thing, and they're actually, in their actions, destroying it. So it's a pretty gruesome scene. I would love to do it in a movie. not that I'm really into gore, but just like this buildup of their salvation being their absolute death, right? I think that's pretty crazy. So meanwhile, Thea and Cal have found their way. I'm going to brush over this detail as much as I can. They found their way into the labyrinth, and Thea and Cal are separated. She does a thing to open a door, because the timepiece they're given can mimic all kinds of objects within it. So it can do retinal scans, and it's so much more advanced than this quantum computer is. The quantum computer is no match to keep them out. However, the security systems are a match against Thea and Cal, and so Theodora gets trapped off for evaluation, and Cal has to go on with this thing charged as an EMP. So one of the cool things is it creates the pattern. His program he makes, it creates this pattern of this Thunderbird inside of this thing, this bird. So he finally gets to the center of the Minotaur, but the problem is with this quantum computer, the Minotaur is not, there's no breathable air. Even the floor, you can't touch it. Nothing in there is meant for humans to be in there, and it's not designed to keep humans out, because that's why it's not meant for humans to be in there. It's because for it to exist, it has to be this material and this chemical constituents and this components. So Cal sets himself on like a chemical fire. His feet are burning off, his shoes are burning off, as he makes the last dash to throw this EMP into the center of the Minotaur, into this axis, the axis of this whole plant that's working. So it's like the center of a wheel. This that goes deep into the earth, and he unleashes it in, and boom, thing blows up in the center. It's not this is a trope in a lot of movies. You blow up the center of the Death Star. It's always about getting the Trojan horse into the middle so it can destroy where things are vulnerable. So this is a very common how do you take down a system trope? Well, it's you got to plant something in the center and send it out. So immediately on its destruction, the saints all go collapsing, and they start to fall down, and those who haven't been killed by it yet are safe, okay? And the world is safe from the saints. Thea is freed. She runs and finds a way to save Cal out of this space where his feet are being scorched and melted still, and he's laying over the centerpiece of this and barely protected, and he's choking to death. And it looks like he's being poisoned, and she saves him from the center, and that is the end of Act 2. Okay, so next week we're going to get into what happens to the world over the next 1,000 years once people are maybe too panicked about potential technology and networking and all the things that led to that, right? They don't want to see a repeat of that. So what corrections does the world make, and how do they make the same mistakes? We're also going to learn what happens to Thea and Cal. They have to retrieve the timepiece, the perpetual motion engine, and it has to begin charging all over again. And this time it's going to take, because it has no charge, it's going to take 1,000 years to do so, to build up its maximum charge. We're going to learn about why even the greater, farther back history of the world, or in the secret history of the world, and in the history of where they're actually from and where humans actually came from. Well, so that's it for this week. Next week, I'll be posting another video for this. We'll be doing a live Zoom call, and there's a group of fans and followers on Facebook called The Cage for fans of Dirtpool Robbins that a few people who followed us created, and that's where we're posting the links to the Zoom call if you want to participate in the Zoom call. So that's it for now, and I'll see you again next week.